Welcome, everyone, to this podcast. I'm very thrilled to have Jenny Shin, who is the coordinator for CARES for two states, the state right where I live, which is Washington State, and she also covers Alaska. Uh, so, Jenny, thanks very much for being with us today. Let me start with a very basic question. What is CARES and why is it so important?
CARES is the Cardiac Arrest Registry to enhance survival. It is a web-based registry to help EMS agencies collect data for benchmark purposes and also for quality improvement. It's really important because without collecting data, there's no way that an agency or a system is able to measure what they're doing and to improve on their processes and protocols. So it helps agencies and systems collect their data and get a temperature of how they're performing.
Very well said. I don't know if everyone realizes it, but in the 10-step program, the very first step is to measure cardiac arrest events. In other words, measure is the first step on the road to improving. And so this is pretty fundamental and pretty important. How involved are the data that are collected? For example, how long does a typical case take to abstract and put in the proper data that you need? Is it a very laborious thing, or how long does it take you?
I think the best way to answer this question is it depends. It depends on the agency and how much data they have. Certainly the case volume is dependent on where you are and how many cardiac arrests you see on a monthly or yearly basis. As far as the actual legwork of collecting data, if you have an electronic patient care record for your agency, it's pretty, I'm not going to say simple, because sometimes things can be simple and it can be complicated once you get into it. But you would basically set a filter and pull all the cases. And depending on your agency, again, that can take seconds or it can take minutes. And after that, the act of entering the data is actually pretty straightforward. It's about 50 to 60 variables, depending on your agency or depending on where you are. And that can take anywhere from 5 minutes to 15 minutes, depending on how technologically savvy you are. But per case, it's actually not too much of a great task. It's pulling the cases from your agency that might be a little bit cumbersome, time cumbersome.
Right. And for admitted patients, you even get hospital outcomes as well. Is that correct?
That is correct. And as far as the hospital outcomes, we actually have hospital contacts established at each receiving hospital. So EMS agencies are able to see what happens to their patients after they are transported to the hospital and vice versa. The hospital is also able to see the context of what happened in the field that was done by the EMS agency. So at each hospital that receives patients for CARES agencies, there is an established contact that abstracts the data from the hospital and provides the outcomes for these patients.
So it's really a partnership between the responding agency, the receiving hospital, and you as the coordinator to gather those data and put it into the CARES registry. Well, obviously, this is pretty important because if you don't know how you're doing, it's impossible to realize that improvement can make things better and to identify where that improvement should occur. Do you share the data? Who gets the data in summary form? What happens to it?
So the data is owned by the EMS agency and the hospital. That data is never shared without the permission of either the EMS agency or the hospital. Myself as the coordinator, I have the privilege of looking at the data, but I'm never allowed to share it out unless the agency or hospital would like for it to be shared out. Oftentimes, there are folks that request to look at the data, and that request gets funneled either through a data sharing committee or it goes directly to the agency to see if they're willing to release the data, or with the hospital if they're willing to release the data. So right off the bat, the only people who do see the data are the folks that have a direct hand in either abstracting the data or reporting the data.
Wonderful. Clearly, the one essential piece of information is, does the patient survive the event? And if they're admitted to the hospital, what is the outcome? Has it been your experience that the hospitals are very cooperative? I mean, I realize there has to be an agreement to share these data, but is it a mutually supportive relationship? Have you encountered some hospitals that just say, no, we're never going to give you those data, so get out of our hair? What has your experience been?
Again, I think this is a variable answer, and depending on where your state is as far as implementing CARES. I know that when states originally start off collecting data, there are some barriers that are faced. Oftentimes, hospitals have concerns about HIPAA and PHI, patient data being exchanged, and so confidentiality is a huge thing. I think, though, once hospitals understand why CARES exists and what the purpose of this data is for, they're a little bit more amenable to participating in CARES and providing the data. And after some time, a lot of trust is built after relationships are established and understanding that this is a quality improvement activity. Hospitals are a little bit less hesitant in giving the data, and in some areas even excited to collaborate and be part of this QI process. So I think a lot of legwork goes into explaining what CARES is and what the purpose of this data is for the hospitals. And any resistance that is initially there eventually gets assuaded by both time and how the data is being used for quality improvement purposes.
Wonderful, wonderful. So how extensive is CARES in the country? Is most of the United States covered and participating in CARES?
It's growing. I believe the goal by 2025 is to have the whole entire nation covered in CARES. At this point, as of 2021, we have about half the country participating in CARES on a statewide basis.
Wow, that's very impressive. One of the advantages of participating in the CARES registry is that it's a consistent data set. In other words, the data collected in Detroit, Michigan is identical to the data collected in Seattle, Washington. And that's what makes it so beneficial, is that you can have these kind of comparisons. So is there an annual report that they issue to all the participants? And can anyone just get on the website and look at it?
There is an annual report, and I think all the current state CARES coordinators can understand how much work that is. And it's kind of the one part of the year where everyone hunkers down and makes sure all of our outcomes are complete. And in order for an agency to get their data in, they have to have 1 full year of complete data, and they have to have less than 2% loss of follow-up. And that goes for agencies and the hospitals.
Tell me what Woodstein is. Why is it important?
So in the 1990s, a number of physicians and medical experts got together at the Woodstein Abbey in Norway to talk about creating a benchmark condition to measure EMS systems, and that happened to be out of hospital cardiac arrest, or specifically VF arrests. And so from this meeting at the Woodstein Abbey, they created this criteria for looking at out of hospital cardiac arrest. I like to think of it as the best case scenario someone can survive an out of hospital cardiac arrest and walk out the hospital. So this criteria is essentially someone who has a resuscitation attempted, found in a non-traumatic etiology, witnessed by a bystander, found in an initial shockable rhythm, and so that is the criteria. And then after that, for those that survive from that criteria are your Woodstein survivors. So it really looks at a subset of patients that really have a really high chance of survival because different aspects of your EMS system is activated and acted upon to make sure this patient survives.
Wow, that's impressive. And all those data are obtained from the run report to know if it meets the Woodstein definition. What you do for these two states and is absolutely vital. And I just, it's kind of like without that information, we wouldn't even know how to begin the process of improvement. So thank you for the work you do. Keep it up. And I hope people who listen to this podcast, if they're not participating in a registry, especially the CARES registry, please ask around and find out what it takes, and maybe in a short time you'll be participating in CARES.
Collecting data might not be the most exciting thing, but it certainly is, as we've mentioned, one of the most fundamental parts of improving out of hospital cardiac arrest survival for your community. So if you don't know how to get started, there's plenty of resources out there. Feel free to reach out to me or anyone at the Resuscitation Academy.
Yes, I agree completely. Thank you for the good work you do, and it has been a pleasure talking to you on this podcast. Take care, Jenny.
Thanks, Nikki.